The trading station orbited a dead star, its metal corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Merchants hawked exotic goods while travelers waited for transport ships. The air recyclers worked overtime, mixing oxygen for humans with methane for the Zeltharians and nitrogen compounds for the insectoid Cricks. 10-year-old Marcus Chen pressed his face against the observation deck's transparent aluminum, watching ships dock and undock in the station's belly. His father worked in the communications center, translating between the dozens of languages that flowed through the station daily. Marcus had grown up here, one of only 50 human children among the station's population of 30,000 beings. The boy's wonder at the cosmic ballet outside was interrupted by heavy footsteps. He turned to see a squad of hegemony soldiers approaching. These weren't the usual station security. These were Vorthak warriors, each standing nearly 9 feet tall with 4 arms and chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian. Their species had conquered 17 star systems before joining the Galactic Hegemony as enforcers. The lead Vorthak, Commander Zeth Ka, swept his 4 eyes across the observation deck. His mandibles clicked in annoyance. The hegemony had received reports of human smuggling operations, and Zeth Ka viewed all humans with suspicion. To him, they were a primitive species that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel. Their small size and soft bodies marked them as inferior in every way that mattered. Marcus stepped aside as the soldiers moved through the area, but his movement caught Zeth Ka's attention. The commander's primary eyes focused on the boy, while his secondary eyes continued scanning for threats. Something about the human child's casual presence irritated him. How dare this weak creature stand so confidently in the presence of superior beings? Human child? Zeth Ka's voice resonated through his chest speakers, the universal translator making his words harsh and guttural. You will move to designated human quarters immediately. Marcus looked up at the towering alien, confusion clear on his young face. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm allowed to be here. My father works on the station. The other Vorthak soldiers stopped their patrol, sensing their commander's growing agitation. Zeth Ka's mandibles spread wide, a sign of aggressive displeasure among his kind. No inferior species should question a Vorthak's orders, especially not a juvenile. Your species lacks discipline, Zeth Ka growled, taking a step closer to Marcus. Perhaps this is why humans require constant supervision. Other beings in the observation deck began to notice the confrontation. A group of Altarian merchants whispered among themselves, their tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Several Zeltharian traders backed away, not wanting to become involved in hegemony business. A pair of crystalline Quellians chimed softly to each other, their harmonic language expressing concern. Marcus stood his ground, though his heart was beating faster. He had learned from his father that showing fear to certain species only encouraged aggressive behavior. Sir, I haven't done anything wrong. The station regulations allow all residents to use public areas during designated hours. Zeth Ka's secondary arms flexed, his natural weapons extending slightly from his forearm sheaths. The boy's calm response infuriated him further. In Vorthak culture, young ones showed absolute deference to warriors. This human child's composed demeanor felt like a challenge to his authority. Humans, Zeth Ka spat, addressing his soldiers as much as the boy, believe they deserve equal treatment despite their obvious inferiority. Your species has existed for mere millennia while the Vorthak have ruled worlds for eons. The commander's voice grew louder, attracting more attention from around the observation deck. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon him, but he had nowhere to go. The Vorthak soldiers had positioned themselves to block the main exits. You will learn proper respect, Zeth Ka declared, raising one of his primary arms high above the boy. The blow came down with the force of a sledgehammer. Zethkar's armored fist struck Marcus across the face, sending the 10-year-old tumbling across the deck. The child hit the bulkhead with a sickening thud and crumpled to the floor, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Gasps echoed through the observation deck. The Altarian merchants recoiled in shock, their tentacles turning pale. The Zeltharians' gill slits flapped rapidly in distress. Even the normally stoic Quellian's harmonic tones rose to higher, more agitated frequencies. Zethkar stood over the motionless boy, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. Let this be a lesson to all humans on this station. The hegemony maintains order through strength, and your species will learn its place. Marcus lay still, his small body crumpled against the bulkhead. Blood pooled beneath his head, and his breathing was shallow and labored. The sight of the injured child sent ripples of unease through the diverse crowd that had gathered. What none of the beings present knew was that Marcus Chen was not just any human child. His father, Dr. James Chen, was indeed a communications specialist, but he was also a former Earth Defense Force colonel who had served in the Proxima Centauri conflicts. Marcus had inherited more than just his father's linguistic abilities. Hidden within the boy's genetic code were enhancements that the early human colonists had developed during the dark years of the expansion wars. Dormant combat protocols, accelerated healing factors, and enhanced reflexes that would only activate under extreme stress. The human colonization effort had learned hard lessons about survival among hostile alien species. As Marcus lay unconscious, his body began to respond to the trauma. Ancient genetic switches, coded into his DNA by military geneticists 50 years earlier, started to activate. His brain chemistry shifted, flooding his system with compounds that would have been impossible for baseline humans to produce naturally. The other beings on the observation deck watched in horrified fascination as the boy's breathing slowly steadied. The bleeding from his nose and mouth began to slow, then stop entirely. His skin, which had been pale from shock, gradually returned to a healthier color. Zethkar noticed none of this. He was too busy savoring his display of dominance, addressing the crowd in his booming voice. This is what happens when inferior species forget their place. The Vorthak have maintained galactic order for 3,000 years, and we will continue to do so. The commander's soldiers shifted uncomfortably. While they respected strength and discipline, striking down a child seemed excessive even by Vorthak standards. Several exchanged glances, their mandibles twitching in subtle signs of unease. Among the watching aliens, whispered conversations began in a dozen different languages. The Altarians spoke of prophecies in their ancient texts about humans who possessed hidden depths. The Zeltharians remembered stories passed down from the early contact wars, tales of human ferocity that had seemed like mythology. Marcus's eyes snapped open. The change was immediate and startling. Where before there had been the bright, curious gaze of a 10-year-old boy, now there was something else entirely. His pupils had dilated to black pools, and when he moved, it was with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone who had just been unconscious. The boy rose to his feet in one smooth motion, his head tilted at an angle that suggested he was listening to something no one else could hear. His breathing had changed, too, becoming deeper and more controlled. The blood on his face had stopped flowing, and the bruises were already beginning to fade. Zethkar was still addressing the crowd when he sensed the change in the atmosphere around him. The other beings had stopped their whispered conversations and were staring past him with expressions of surprise and growing alarm. The commander turned, expecting to see the human child still crumpled on the deck. Instead, he found Marcus standing less than 3 feet away, his dark eyes fixed on the Vorthak commander with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. The boy's stance was different too, balanced and ready in a way that triggered ancient warning signals in Zethkar's predator brain. "Human child?" Zethkar growled, though there was now a note of uncertainty in his voice. Return to your quarters immediately or face further consequences. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the commander's words. When he spoke, his voice was still that of a 10-year-old boy, but there was something underneath it now, something that made several of the watching aliens step backward. "You hurt me," Marcus said simply, his eyes never leaving Zethka's face. That was a mistake. The temperature in the observation deck seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Zethka's mandibles spread wider, his natural reaction to what he perceived as a threat display from prey. The idea that this small human could pose any danger to a Vorthak warrior was absurd. His species had evolved as apex predators on a world where the gravity was twice that of Earth, and their exoskeletons could deflect energy weapons. "You dare threaten me, human spawn?" Zethka's voice boomed through the observation deck. His forearms extended to their full span, a display meant to intimidate. "I will teach you what happens to those who challenge the hegemony's authority." The commander's soldiers moved to flank the boy, their own weapons partially drawn. The crowd of alien observers pressed back against the walls, creating a circle around the confrontation. Some activated personal recording devices, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Marcus remained perfectly still, his enhanced senses now fully online. He could hear the rapid heartbeats of the nervous observers, smell the fear pheromones being released by dozens of different species, and feel the vibrations of the station's machinery through his feet. Most importantly, he could see the micro-movements of the Vorthak soldiers, reading their intentions through body language that his awakened genetics allowed him to interpret with deadly accuracy. "You cannot even comprehend what you've awakened," Marcus said, his young voice carrying an odd harmonic that made several aliens cover their auditory organs. "Humans are not what you think we are." Dr. James Chen had told his son stories about the old days, when humanity first encountered hostile alien species during the expansion period. The early colonists had faced extinction until human scientists developed the Guardian Protocol, a genetic enhancement program that created protectors capable of defending human settlements. The program had been discontinued after the Galactic Accords were signed, but the genetic modifications remained dormant in certain bloodlines, waiting for the right trigger. Zethka lunged forward with the speed that made his species feared across 17 star systems. His primary arm struck toward Marcus with enough force to shatter reinforced plasteel. The blow should have turned the human child into a red smear across the observation deck. Instead, Marcus simply wasn't there anymore. The boy had moved with impossible speed, flowing around the commander's strike like water around a stone. Before Zethka could even process what had happened, Marcus was behind him, having somehow passed through the gap between the commander's secondary arms without making contact. The crowd gasped in amazement. Several of the Altarian merchants began chittering in their ancient language, recognizing movements that resembled techniques from their own martial traditions. The Quellian's harmonic song shifted to frequencies that expressed profound surprise and growing excitement. Zethka spun around, his four eyes trying to track the small figure that seemed to flicker in and out of his peripheral vision. "Impossible! No human moves like that!" Marcus paused just long enough for the commander to focus on him. "We are far older than you realize, Commander, and far more dangerous than you could imagine." The boy's enhanced genetics had unlocked not just physical capabilities, but also access to genetic memory patterns stored in his DNA. He could feel the presence of his ancestors, the Guardian operatives who had faced down threats that would have destroyed human civilization. Their knowledge flowed through him like a river of fire, teaching him techniques that had been perfected in battles across the galaxy. One of Zethka's soldiers, a younger Vorthak, named Kelth Su, raised his energy weapon. "Commander, the human is using some form of enhancement technology. We should neutralize it immediately." Marcus turned his attention to the soldier, and Kelth-Su found himself staring into eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience impossible in a 10-year-old. "Your weapon will not fire," the boy said with absolute certainty. Kelth-Su pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He checked his weapon's power cell, found it fully charged, and tried again. The energy rifle remained silent. Around the circle of soldiers, similar clicking sounds echoed as other Vorthak warriors discovered their weapons had mysteriously malfunctioned. "Electromagnetic pulse," whispered one of the Zeltharian observers to his companion. The human child generated a localized EMP field without any visible technology. This was not entirely accurate, but the aliens had no way of knowing that Marcus's enhanced nervous system could now generate and control bioelectric fields far beyond baseline human capability. The Guardian Protocol had incorporated genetic material from several species that naturally produced electrical discharges, weaving those abilities into the human genome in ways that activated only during extreme stress. Zeth-Ka was beginning to feel the first stirrings of genuine concern. His soldiers' weapons were useless, and the human child was demonstrating capabilities that defied everything he knew about the species. But admitting fear was not in the Vorthak nature, and his pride demanded that he continue the confrontation. "Tricks and technology," the commander snarled, drawing his ceremonial combat blades from the sheaths along his forearms. The monomolecular edges gleamed under the observation deck's artificial lighting. "Let us see how your enhancements fare against Vorthak steel." Marcus nodded, as if approving of the commander's choice. "Yes, let's settle this properly." The boy moved to the center of the open area, positioning himself with the easy confidence of a trained fighter. The watching aliens murmured among themselves, recognizing combat stances from their own species' martial traditions reflected in the human child's posture. Zeth-Ka charged forward, his four arms weaving a pattern of deadly strikes that should have overwhelmed any single opponent. His blades moved in complex arcs, creating a steel web that no enemy had ever penetrated. The techniques had been refined over millennia of Vorthak warfare and had never failed against a smaller opponent. Marcus flowed through the attack like smoke, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to perceive the commander's movements in slow motion. He could see the exact trajectory of each blade, calculate the precise timing needed to avoid them, and identify the openings in Zeth-Ka's defense that a trained warrior could exploit. The boy's movements were beautiful to watch, a dance of precision and grace that seemed to defy physics. He bent backward to avoid a horizontal slice, spun sideways to let a thrust pass harmlessly by, and ducked under a downward chop with millimeters to spare. Never once did the commander's blades find their target. "Stand still and fight!" Zeth-Ka roared, his mandibles clicking in frustration as strike after strike failed to connect. "I am fighting," Marcus replied, his voice calm despite his impossible acrobatics. "You're simply not skilled enough to touch me." The insult struck deeper than any physical blow could have. In Vorthak culture, martial prowess was the highest virtue, and to be called inadequate by a child of an inferior species was an unbearable humiliation. Zeth-Ka's attacks became wilder, fueled by rage rather than technique. This was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. The boy stopped evading and moved into the commander's guard, his small size allowing him to slip past defenses designed for larger opponents. Before Zeth-Ka could react, Marcus struck the Vorthak's primary wrist with surgical precision, hitting a nerve cluster that caused the commander to drop one of his blades. The weapon clattered to the deck, and suddenly, the observation deck was filled with shocked silence. A human child had disarmed a Vorthak warrior. Marcus stepped back, allowing Zeth-Ka to retrieve his weapon if he chose. "You struck me when I was defenseless," the boy said, his young face serious. "I could end this confrontation right now, but I want you to understand what you're facing." The commander flexed his primary hand, trying to restore feeling to his numbed fingers. Around them, the alien observers were recording everything, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be discussed across the galaxy for years to come. "What are you?" Zeth-Ka whispered, his voice barely audible through his translator. Marcus smiled. And for a moment, he looked like nothing more than a 10-year-old boy again. "I'm human," he said simply, "and that should terrify you." The Vorthak commander picked up his dropped blade, but his confidence was shattered. Everything he had believed about humans, about their weakness and inferiority, was crumbling before his eyes. If this child could match a Vorthak warrior in combat, what did that say about the adult humans who had raised him? More importantly, if humans possessed such capabilities, why had they never used them during the early contact wars? What kind of restraint did it take for a species to hide such power while being treated as inferiors by the galactic hegemony? Around the observation deck, similar thoughts were occurring to aliens of dozens of different species. The comfortable assumptions that had governed galactic politics for centuries were suddenly in question. Marcus sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere and knew that his demonstration was having the desired effect. But he also understood that the confrontation could not end with simple humiliation. Zeth-Ka's pride demanded satisfaction, and Vorthak culture would not allow the commander to simply walk away from a challenge. The boy settled into a new stance, one that the genetic memories identified as particularly effective against larger, stronger opponents. "Commander," he said formally, "you have proven that you cannot defeat me with weapons. Will you accept defeat, or do you require further demonstration?" Zeth-Ka's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of internal struggle among his kind. To accept defeat from a human child would destroy his reputation and possibly end his career. But to continue fighting meant facing an opponent who had already proven superior in ways that challenged everything he understood about warfare. The commander made his choice. He dropped his weapons and extended all four arms in the Vorthak gesture of formal challenge. "Combat without weapons," he declared in his booming voice. "Strength against strength, as our ancestors fought." Marcus nodded, understanding that this was the only way the confrontation could end with honor intact for both participants. "As you wish, Commander." The real fight was about to begin. The observation deck fell into complete silence as the two fighters faced each other. Commander Zeth-Ka stood nearly 9 feet tall, his 4 muscular arms ending in clawed hands that could crush steel. His exoskeleton was built for war, evolved through millions of years of conflict on a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived. Against him stood Marcus Chen, a 10-year-old human boy who barely reached the Vorthak's midsection. To any reasonable observer, the outcome should have been decided before it began. But the watching aliens had already seen the impossible happen once, and they waited with growing anticipation to witness what would unfold. Marcus felt the full weight of his genetic inheritance flowing through him now. The Guardian Protocol had been humanity's greatest secret, a response to the early contact wars when human colonies faced extinction from hostile alien species. Scientists had worked in hidden laboratories, incorporating genetic material from dozens of species to create humans capable of defending their own kind against any threat. The program had been officially terminated when the Galactic Accords established peace, but the enhanced bloodlines remained, passed down through families who had sworn to protect the secret. Marcus's father had hoped the boy would never need to access his inheritance, but the universe had different plans. Zeth-Ka opened with a 4-armed grapple, his standard technique for overwhelming smaller opponents. His reach advantage should have made it impossible for the human to avoid capture. But Marcus had already moved, slipping under the commander's primary arms and striking upward with the heel of his palm. The blow connected with a nerve cluster beneath Zeth-Ka's secondary shoulder, sending numbing shock waves through the Vorthak's left side. The commander stumbled, his left arms temporarily paralyzed, and Marcus was already repositioning for his next attack. "Impossible," breathed Kelth Su, the younger Vorthak soldier. "No creature that small should have the strength to affect a Vorthak warrior." But it wasn't about raw strength. The Guardian Protocol had enhanced Marcus's knowledge of anatomy and pressure points for hundreds of different species. Where others saw an impenetrable exoskeleton, he saw vulnerable joints and nerve clusters. Where they saw overwhelming size and strength, he saw leverage points and structural weaknesses. Zeth-Ka recovered quickly, his right arm sweeping in wide arcs to prevent the human from getting close again. But Marcus was no longer where the commander expected him to be. The boy had somehow gotten behind him again, and this time he struck at the junction where Zeth-Ka's secondary spine connected to his primary nervous system. The Vorthak commander roared in pain and spun around, but his movements were becoming slower and less coordinated. The human child's precise strikes were systematically shutting down his body's systems, and there was nothing his training had prepared him for. Around the observation deck, aliens from across the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The Altarian merchants had stopped their nervous chittering and were recording everything with their bioluminescent patches. The Zeltharians' gill slits had gone completely still, a sign of intense concentration among their species. Even the crystalline Quellians had ceased their harmonic communications. Their entire attention focused on the impossible battle unfolding before them. Marcus paused in his assault, allowing Zeth-Ka a moment to recover. The boy's enhanced genetics were giving him access to tactical knowledge that suggested the best way to end this confrontation without causing permanent damage to his opponent. "You cannot win, Commander," Marcus said, his young voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible for someone his age. "Your species evolved for brute force confrontations, but humans learned to fight smarter opponents with superior technology and natural advantages. We learned to turn our enemies' strengths against them." Zeth-Ka struggled to his feet, his pride refusing to allow him to surrender even as his body betrayed him. "What manner of creature are you? This is not natural human ability." Marcus tilted his head, considering how much to reveal. Around them, the alien observers were already recording and transmitting what they had seen. The secret of human enhancement would soon be spreading across the galaxy, whether he revealed it or not. "My species faced extinction during the early contact wars," the boy explained, his voice carrying the weight of racial memory. "We were outmatched by older, stronger civilizations that viewed us as nothing more than primitive animals. So we adapted. We changed ourselves to become what we needed to be to survive." The watching aliens murmured among themselves as the implications of Marcus's words sank in. Humans had possessed these capabilities all along, during every diplomatic negotiation, every trade agreement, every treaty that had been signed under the assumption of human weakness. Dr. James Chen arrived at the observation deck at a run, having been alerted by station security about the confrontation involving his son. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, taking in the scene with the trained eye of a former military officer. Marcus was unharmed, standing calmly in a combat stance that James recognized from his own Guardian Protocol training. Commander Zeth-Ka was on one knee, clearly outmatched but still attempting to continue the fight. "Marcus," James called out, his voice carrying parental authority mixed with tactical assessment. "Status report." The boy's enhanced awareness immediately recognized his father's voice and shifted into a different mode. "Father, the commander struck me without provocation. I have defended myself according to Protocol 7 guidelines. No permanent damage has been inflicted on the aggressor." James nodded, understanding immediately what had occurred. His son's dormant genetics had been activated by the attack, and the boy was now operating under combat protocols that had been designed to handle exactly this type of situation. "Commander Zeth-Ka," James addressed the Vorthak warrior, his voice carrying the crisp authority of his former rank. "I am Dr. James Chen, former colonel of the Earth Defense Force and current diplomatic liaison for this station. My son has demonstrated considerable restraint in this encounter. I suggest you accept his mercy." Zethka looked between the father and son, beginning to understand that he had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple confrontation with a human child. The boy possessed military training and genetic enhancements, while the father carried himself with the bearing of an experienced warrior. "Your son is no ordinary human," the commander managed, his translator conveying both respect and confusion. "No," James agreed. "He is not. And neither am I, nor are many of the humans you encounter throughout the galaxy. We have simply chosen not to advertise our capabilities." Around the observation deck, this revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled aliens. Species that had dismissed humans as physically inferior were rapidly reassessing their assumptions. Trade agreements, military alliances, and diplomatic protocols that had been based on perceived human weakness were suddenly in question. Marcus stepped forward, addressing Commander Zeth-Ka directly. "You struck me because you believed humans were inferior and deserved no respect. You have learned otherwise. Will you carry this knowledge back to your superiors?" The Vorthak commander slowly raised himself to his full height, though his movements were still affected by Marcus's precise strikes. In his culture, demonstrating superior combat skill earned respect regardless of species or age. The human child had proven himself a warrior by any Vorthak standard. "I will report that humans possess hidden depths that the hegemony has not properly assessed," Zeth-Ka said formally. "And I will recommend that future interactions proceed with appropriate respect for your species' capabilities." Marcus nodded, accepting the commander's words as sufficient. "The Guardian Protocol was created to protect humanity from extinction," he explained to the assembled crowd. "It remains active in case we face that threat again. We prefer peace and cooperation, but we are prepared for war if necessary." The boys' enhanced genetics were already beginning to dial back their influence as the immediate threat passed. His voice lost some of its unnatural authority, and his stance relaxed into something more appropriate for a 10-year-old. But the knowledge and capabilities remained, ready to emerge again if needed. Kelth Su and the other Vorthak soldiers helped their commander toward the exit. Their entire understanding of galactic politics fundamentally altered by what they had witnessed. As they departed, Zeth-Ka paused to look back at Marcus one final time. "What you have shown me today," the commander said quietly, "will change how the hegemony views humanity. I hope your species is prepared for the consequences." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "We have been preparing for consequences since the day we left Earth, Commander. We will adapt to whatever comes next." As the Vorthak soldiers departed, the crowd of alien observers began to disperse, but their quiet conversations would carry news of this encounter across the galaxy within hours. Some spoke of human deception and hidden agendas, while others discussed the implications of a species that chose restraint over domination, despite possessing superior capabilities. Dr. James Chen approached his son, noting the way the boy's enhanced awareness was gradually returning to normal childhood levels. "How do you feel, Marcus?" "Different," the boy admitted, looking at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I remember things I've never learned, and I can still feel the combat protocols running in the background. Is this what it was like for you during the expansion wars?" James placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, though your activation seems more complete than most. The geneticists always theorized that the enhancements would grow stronger with each generation." Around them, the observation deck was returning to normal operations, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Aliens who had previously ignored or dismissed the human presence now watched with newfound wariness and respect. The comfortable assumptions that had governed interspecies relations for decades were crumbling. Marcus looked out at the stars beyond the transparent aluminum, understanding for the first time that his actions today would have consequences that rippled far beyond this single space station. The secret of human enhancement was out, and the galaxy would never view his species the same way again. "Did we do the right thing, Father?" he asked, his voice once again that of a concerned child. James Chen considered the question carefully, weighing decades of military experience and diplomatic knowledge. "You defended yourself when attacked, and you showed mercy when you could have destroyed your opponent. Those are the actions of a guardian, Marcus. Whether the consequences are good or bad for humanity as a whole, we'll face them together." As father and son left the observation deck, news of the confrontation was already spreading through the station's communication networks. Within hours, it would reach the hegemony's capital worlds. Within days, it would transform the balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity's long masquerade as a weak and harmless species was finally over, and the universe would never be the same.